This is the final session of the first day, and it is, where are you? That one there, separation of mosque and state. As we all know, nothing is more important for the success of freedom than the separation of church and state. When Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States in 1831, he looked around and he said, the greatest contribution that the Americans have made to freedom in the world is the separation of church and state, because it frees the state from the shackles of religion and it frees the people to be able to pursue their own religion freely, and that makes religion competitive. And so that churches have to compete with one another for members and believers. And this keeps them all, makes them all much more honest and much more vigorous, and makes religion in America much more genuine and intense than it is, for example, in Europe. And he encouraged Europe to adopt separation of church and state, which the Europeans did not do, to their laws. So that as we look at the Islamic world, and is there a Tocqueville in the Islamic world today? Is there someone, is it possible, is there anybody talking now about the separation of mosque and state? It is said, and we will hear from three experts today on this subject, it is said often that one of the main differences between Sunni Islam and Shiite Islam is that whereas the Sunnis believe that it's quite all right for clerical rule to take place in a secular state, that until Khomeini's revolution in Iran in 1979, the Shiites generally did not believe that, and they believed, much as certain Jewish and Christian sects also believed, that no clerical rule could possibly be legitimate until the Messiah had come. And so the Jews, the Messiah to come for the first time, and the Christians and Shiites, Messiah coming for the second time, Jesus in one case, and the 12th Imam in the Shiite case. So I hope that we will hear from at least one of our panelists, of whom there are three, some discussion as to whether there is some kind of wedge within Islamic doctrine and perhaps even within Muslim practice to give us some hope that there might be some kind of separation of mosque and state. But anyway, you didn't come here to hear me, you came here to hear our terrific panel, which consists of Walid Phares, who is in Washington at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and then also has wangled for himself some kind of joint appointment at the European Foundation for Democracies in Brussels. So I suppose when he gets tired of the food in Washington, he goes off to Brussels to stimulate his palate, etc. And let me make sure that I get the order right. Walid will be first. He will be followed by Hassan Fatamullah, who is the unlikely combination of a Bangladeshi and Canadian journalist, playwright, and human rights activist, who has produced several DVDs challenging the doctrines of Sharia and trying to make people aware of the downside of Islamism and radical Islam, and tried to promote a proper system of civil justice, which he insists cannot take place if Sharia law has been introduced into the system. So he's second. And third is Salam Nemat, who runs the Washington Bureau of Al Hayat, which is one of the most widely read Arab daily publications in the world. It's based in London. He's happily in Washington with us. And he also works at LBC, which is a Lebanese television satellite channel. And I can tell you that we are all lucky to have such distinguished people here with us today. I am personally thrilled to have the chance to hear all of you and to be here together with all of you. So, Walid, if you will start, then we'll just try to move along.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael. It's always a joy to read you in the Washington and Beyond Press. And today you're the moderator, and I'm very pleased that you are. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference, this very, very important conference. And I would like to begin by saying that I may not be the one on the panel who will go on technical analysis to discuss the relationship between mosque and state, but I will talk in terms of preamble about the political culture internationally that is dealing with the issue of basically the Islamist ideology attempting to enforce Sharia law not just within societies but in the international relations realm. And that is a new area of interest whereby if you are followers of the ideologues and the radical clerics and the intellectuals, voices of the Salafist movement, even also the Khomeinist movement, if you are avid watchers of Al Jazeera, Al Manar, and the rest, you will see that there is a trend among those currents to raise the issue of implementation of an international presence, not just of Sharia law, but of the sanctity of what they perceive and call as an international Islamic presence that has to be accepted by international law. So the battle is not just within every single society around the world, but also within the international society, the last call of which was when one of the most prominent speakers on Al Jazeera, Sheikh Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, actually gathered a number of clerics and issued a memo to the international community saying that there should be a new legislation at the level of the Security Council, at the level of the General Assembly of the United Nations that would punish and sanction those who will be perceived as criticizing religion, and in this case, Islam, of course. So I'll talk about that. But before that, a couple quick remarks. This summit is very important, not just because of what the speakers are saying and the interaction, but also because of the reactions to it. Those among you who are or have been online since this morning can realize that in the world of the bloggers and the world of the websites, attacks have already begun. Attacks against the conference, sharp attacks, very deep ones. But what is interesting about these attacks, and we'll take the advantage of this panel to respond live to these attacks, is that who are the attackers? A whole combination of people who, in general, do not go with each other. All the Wahhabi Salafi crowd, all the Khomeinist crowd, but also, interestingly enough, Marxist jihadists. That's a new type of people. Marxists who lost, their ideology, and now they become, secular jihadists. So we have a counterpart elsewhere. Their arguments are very interesting. They're saying that this conference, all the participants, do not represent the Muslim world, as if they do. That is very amazing. That the speakers and the individuals here are trying to disseminate ideas. Of course, what are we trying to do? That the speakers are not credible. Obviously, their ideologies are considered more credible, and that the speakers and the individuals in this conference are trying to get to funding. That's why they're here. Yes, we are trying to get to funding to spread those ideas because we don't want the Wahhabi funding. We don't want the Khomeinist funding. So let that be acknowledged. In my sense, this summit and those that are going to be following it in the future, and that would be the mark of success. If this is the last meeting, then it will be a failure. It should be the first of many, many other meetings, much bigger year after year, better funded, strengthened, and recognized by the international community. This, in my sense, is, and I am coining this, a Muslim resistance against jihadism. It comes from inside the community, with the friends of the community. Not everybody here is Muslim, but the non-Muslims present here wants to back and support a new Muslim war of ideas, revolution, intellectual revolution that will create pluralism inside the Muslim world. Nobody wants to eliminate anybody else, just to create pluralism, coexistence among Muslims so that the Muslim community worldwide would be able to get to a credible coexistence with the rest of other cultures, civilizations, religions, and nations. In my short remarks, I hope, quickly, I'd like to talk about the battlefield in the international relations. And I would like to make a distinction here between two types of debates. I will distance myself from the pure theological debate, because I know many other experts are here, were here, and will be here tomorrow, and will tackle this issue of, for example, the possibility of reforming the Quran, the possibility of interpreting the Quran. Those who among us have said, well, we have departed ourselves from faith, but we are still sociologically part of faith, sociological Muslims, as was the case with Christians and with Jews and with Hindus and others. So what we have here is a collectivity of various responses to the Islamists and the jihadists. All these responses are not really linked to each other, may not be parallel to each other or equivalent to each other, but they come and they converge on one point. We need this pluralism. We need that within the Muslim world there will be this mutual recognition, and that the Muslim world, the Muslim society, can fit itself and insert itself in the present stage of international relations, a matter that jihadists, Salafists, and Khomeinists do not want to see happening, are rejecting. Probably the Salafists more than the Khomeinists, but both are basically saying this is not the international set of laws that we are going to be going under, in as much as other communities around the world are doing the same. If we analyze the speeches of Osama bin Laden, Ayman Zawahiri, all the way down to the local emirs around the world, or the Imamate side, the other side of the caliphate in Iran, shyly so, you will see that there is a rejection of international law. International law is kafir, not just the infidels are kafir. And that is a product, basically, of a society which has not been sanctioned and authorized in this endeavor to create laws that will be ahead and above the laws that those specific fundamentalists, Salafis and Khomeinis, wants to establish. So we are in deep trouble internationally because the fundamentalists, let me call them the jihadists, as I do in my books, are on a project of establishing two planets on one, physical planet. One is the space where they believe the Sharia law, seen by them as restrictive as possible, is established, and then the rest of the world, what many among us call Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Islam. In fact, it's Dar al-Jihad and the rest, including Muslims, including Shia and Sunni, who do not go by the Wahhabi and Salafists. And we heard from previous panels very clearly that the biggest battle, even the physical battle, the first one, is within the Muslim world. And unfortunately, the West has done a very bad job over the past, I'd say, 16 years at least, because I would say at the end of the Cold War, much attention of the international community of the West, the wealthy West, should have been on the rise of the jihadist movement. We dodge every single attempt by the jihadists to come and tell us we're here, we're threatening you, we are taking over these societies. All of that has been dodged by the West, by its governments, by its spokespersons, by its most lethal weapon against education, that is the educators, i.e. the academic community in the West, specifically in America, has been the most obstructive element and phenomenon in front of Western and democratic, in general, understanding of who the jihadists are and what do they want. It all started in the classroom of America and the rest of the world. So my remarks are going to be about 5 concepts that needs to be addressed, other than the rest, the bulk of points in theology. For example, issue of women, family status, faith, and other matters related to it. That is a long-term evolution within the Muslim world, which secular summits like this one, independent thinkers like the ones who have been speaking and will speak tomorrow, will have to deal with. And we are really, really early in the process. This is only the beginning of a very long journey where Muslim reformers, Muslim intellectuals, they want to call themselves whatever they want to call themselves, with the help of their supporters, are going to undertake this issue of reform. But what I'm talking about is something else, something more urgent, pressing. It has to do with national security, international security. It has to do with human rights, with a direct impact on the lives, both individual and collective, of societies around the world. It has to do with 5 concepts that have an impact on reality. Now, these concepts, linked to religious and faith discussion, yes, will have to be addressed intellectually, maybe. But for the time being, there is a pressing need for the international community, made of Muslims and non-Muslims, to address them and send a strong message that those concepts are unfit with international law as we know it. And probably the most important voices that could begin that criticism, begin that definition or redefinition of these concepts, are Muslim voices which are rejecting the interpretations by the Salafists and the Khomeinists. Let me start with framing where I'm going to come from. International relations as we know them, and this is not a lecture on international relations, are based on the concepts of necessity of peace, pluralism, self-determination, democracy, freedom, human rights, and the rest. Now, the Islamist ideology, or the Islamist agenda, on the other hand, on its own planet, is rejecting all of that, if not sanctioned by, or if not in the route to, or to be applied by at the service of the concepts of establishing the caliphate, or re-establishing the caliphate, or establishing the imamate, one or the other. And therefore, the jihadist paradigm since the 20s for the Salafists, and since the late 70s for the Khomeinists, is basically to go against those values. Let me start with the first one, very popular, known, and obviously creates most of the problems, is the issue of jihad. The issue of jihad with regard to the Islamist agenda is a matter of to be authorized or not. It's not a question of the concept is right or not to be accepted by international community. It's who authorizes it. So they do not even discuss the issue of is jihadism as an act of war, of peace, of management of society, of punishment. Is that act fit with international? Meaning, can we come and say, if you are a foreign minister of an Islamist regime or an organization, that jihadism is the equivalent, let's say, of self-defense, as it's been argued on our campuses and around the world? Well, it may be or not, but not in international relations. Because if we open that door of every concept that we bring from faith or religion of any other group and say, well, in my understanding, it is legitimate defense, what we're doing is that we're destroying international legal order, because then some Christians will come and say, well, Crusadism is a form of legitimate defense. And Hindus would say, well, we have something that is close to. Well, that is related to faith. When it comes to the center stage, to the battlefield of reality, then those concepts cannot be linked to international relations. It is illegal. It's illegitimate, based on the principles of the League of Nations, on the United Nations, and on the international secular covenant by international society, to have jihad authorized. Now, one can dream of jihad as a spiritual yoga, if that is the case, as many of our intellectuals are preaching to our classrooms. Jihad is a form of intellectual yoga, spiritual yoga. Yes, Muhammad Atta and Ziyad al-Jarrah slammed the buildings, and they were jihadist yogis. They could do that if they want to. That is not the case when it comes to international law. And then now there's a new concept that is traveling across the US and the West, saying, well, you have the good jihad and the bad jihad. We don't buy that. I mean, especially those who understand what it is, its theology and its ideology, which is more important than the theology. It is not that, well, Al-Qaeda are bad jihadists and there is a true jihadism. I'm interested in this. What is that true jihadism? Let's say Al-Qaeda is an offshoot. These are rebels. They have engaged in war against the infidels prematurely or outside the norms of war, of laws of war. So what are the other jihadists? Who are the other jihadists? So if we buy into the idea that in order to create categories, that there are good jihadists and bad jihadists, well, that could be an intellectual discussion. In international law, there is no such thing as jihadism. In the same way, there is no such thing as any other religious form of wars and conflict. The second concept that has to be addressed internationally, which is very important, is the distinction between kuffar and non-kuffar. Now, we translate it into infidel. I think I have a different translation for that, but we're not going to harass you with it. Infidel is a notion that you are unfaithful to something, infidel. Kuffar, you are transgressing, basically. You are basically committing a sin, kufr. That, in a term of notion of religion, is fine. You could handle that. We could handle that The Jews have a notion of Jews and Gentiles. The Christians have people of faith and non-believers. And every single religion in the world may have these notions. But to have the notion of kafir on the political ground, meaning you are discriminating and creating, talking to the fundamentalists, of course, a system of selection of individuals just on the basis of not willing to conform to your own views. And more serious would be the discrimination. If you are a kuffar, kafir, then you are being discriminated against. That is against international law. The issue of khilafah, number 3. I'm going to make a different nuance here. For individuals to dream of a glorious past, if that past is indeed seen as glorious, fine. Be part of history books. In my own textbooks out of Beirut, I read about the Khilafah. It was very normal. Well, this was the equivalent of the empires in Rome, the Byzantine Empire, the Christian Empire, the other empires. But to reconstitute the caliphate in the reality of the 20th, 21st century, claiming that this is a divine injunction, that Allah is ordering actually fighters to reconstitute the caliphate, and every path should take to the caliphate, means that practically you want to destroy 21 Arab governments as they exist, and 52 Muslim states as they exist. Cancel all those borders, not just the Sunni triangle in Iraq, to establish a local fragment of the caliphate. A caliphate is not there. It's not in Fallujah. A caliphate is from Morocco, the Canary Islands, all the way to the Uyghur land in China. Now, as a worldview of individuals and peoples who would seek that this would happen in a peaceful way, that the Muslim world will unite in some forms like Europe has united and there is an OAS organization, yes. And I argue, and I've argued with many intellectuals who go after the caliphate, including on Al Jazeera and elsewhere. You want to do a caliphate, fine. Go for elections, form a party, win all these elections in 52 Muslim states, and then conclude a confederal system between all Muslim states. But to call on the jihadists to behead and kill and assassinate and use weapons of destruction and mass destruction and attack the West because you have an injunction from Allah to do it, that is absolutely against international law. And when I'm going over these points, the question is not to ask the jihadists not to go by that. The question is really to address the highest authorities in the state system in the Muslim world, not just the philosophers and the ideologues. There is something called the Organization of Muslim States. It has a Secretary General. It is the equivalent of a European Union, of an international organization, and they claim they're representing the 1.2 to 1.x million Muslims around the world. And they need to have a clear attitude on these issues, to make it very clear that jihadism is not the official policy of the OAS, that kuffar is not something accepted by the policies of all these governments, regimes, not just the radical ones, but including the moderate ones. And that, of course, the khilafah is not an objective, a military objective and a militant objective. Why to do so? Because when the jihadist ideologues are talking to their own constituencies, in the chat rooms and elsewhere, what they are telling them, and I'm sure many of my colleagues would agree on this, especially the Arabic-speaking ones, and also Urdu and Persian and Farsi and others, they're telling them, this is our objective. These are the kuffars. Of course, kuffars, Christian Jews, but also Muslims who don't go by that. And we want to reach the caliphate, and this is jihad. And look, the international leadership of the Muslim world is not saying otherwise. Now that's the problem. The international community of 52 Muslim governments should be the first ones to basically oppose those principles and make them illegal in the Muslim world before asking the United Nations or others to do so. In my last 3 minutes, I would like to talk about one point that is geopolitical and direct. Yes, this is a summit of very courageous people, probably and actually more courageous than the jihadists themselves. Because give me my 2 minutes, come on. Because the Wahhabis are paying billions of dollars for this enterprise for the last many decades. The Khomeinis now have learned, by the way, the Iranians are spreading huge monies, if you're interested, in budgets around the world. We'll come back to that in the questions and answers. But the West have been abandoning the courageous Muslim reformers, the Muslim resistance against jihadism and extremism has been abandoned, by the way. I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about decades. I mean, the Algerians have lost 140,000 Muslim Sunni at the hands of an equivalent to Al-Qaeda. What did the advisors of our government, because in the previous panel somebody said, oh, the State Department is not here. Why would the State Department be here? Because if I'm going to be very open about it. Because those who deal with the war of ideas at the State Department have advisors who on campuses have said that the reformers among the Muslims are just not representative of the Muslim world, and those who represent the real future of the Muslim world are the jihadists. If the advisors at Georgetown University, at Harvard University, Stanford University are the ones who are advising the United States government, don't expect the State Department to be here. So in my last minute, I'd say the importance of the summit is that it's going to witness, and that the American public, citizens, are going to see, in the same way they saw the bad guys climbing the buildings and beheading people, the public of America and of democracies around the world are going to hear these voices. And that will be the beginning of a process that will put pressure on democracies, on governments, to support, yes, an official policy of supporting the Muslim dissidents in the same way we supported the bringing down of the South African apartheid, supporting East Europeans, even democracy in Latin America. We spoke on human rights with China. It's time to talk to the peoples of the Muslim world, not the regimes who are oppressing them. Thank you very much.